Texas didn't turn red. It was engineered that way. Every election cycle, we hear the same question. If Texas is getting younger, more diverse, and more urban, why does it still look so solidly Republican on election night? The answer isn't voter ideology, it's map making. And today, we're going to decode how Texas Republicans use gerrymandering to lock in power despite massive demographic change, and how this model has become a blueprint for minority rule nationwide. This conversation matters more than ever because Texas is not politically static. Non white Texans account for nearly all of the state's population growth over the last decade. Democrats routinely win statewide popular vote shares close to Republicans, and yet competitive districts keep disappearing. That disconnect isn't accidental, it's the predictable result of how political power is allocated. After the 2020 census, Texas gained seats in Congress because of population growth driven largely by Black, Latino, and Asian communities. But when it came time to draw new maps, those same communities saw their political influence diluted. That's the core contradiction we need to understand. In 2021, Texas Republicans redrew congressional and state legislative maps. Instead of creating new districts where growing communities could elect candidates of their choice, the maps cracked and packed those voters across districts designed to preserve Republican control. Cracking means splitting a voting block across multiple districts so it can't form a majority anywhere. Packing means stuffing as many opposition voters as possible into one district to waste their votes. The result? Fewer competitive seats. Fewer districts where minority voters can influence outcomes. More safe Republican seats, even as the state becomes less conservative overall. Republican leaders insisted these maps were race neutral. But race neutral language doesn't cancel out racial effects. Here's the rhetorical trick. When accused of racial vote dilution, Texas officials don't talk about race. They talk about urban versus rural voters. They talk about communities of interest. They talk about partisan geography. But those categories function as proxies. In Texas, race and partisanship overlap heavily because of decades of political polarization. So when lawmakers say they're just sorting voters by partisanship or geography, the racial impact remains predictable and severe. That predictability is well documented in voting rights litigation and expert analysis. It's plausible deniability. Before 2013, Texas was subject to a key provision of the Voting Rights Act called Section 5. That meant the state had to get federal approval before changing its voting laws or maps. The burden was on Texas to prove changes wouldn't harm minority voters. That safeguard disappeared after the Supreme Court's Shelby County v. Holder decision. The court didn't ban the Voting Rights Act outright. It disabled the coverage formula that made preclearance enforceable. Overnight, the rules flipped. Instead of stopping discriminatory maps before elections, civil rights groups now have to challenge them after the fact, in long, expensive court battles that can take years. Elections happen under contested maps. Damage is done before cases are resolved. That's not neutral. It's structural advantage. In 2021, the Supreme Court narrowed Section 2 of the Voting Rights Act in Brnovich v. Democratic National Committee. The ruling introduced new hurdles for proving discrimination, giving states more leeway to justify restrictive rules as ordinary or traditional. Together, Shelby County and Brnovich changed the enforcement landscape. Texas lawmakers didn't need to defy the law. They just needed to exploit its weakened guardrails. And they did. So what does this look like in practice? Texas can be closely divided statewide, but safely Republican district by district. Democrats can rack up huge margins in urban areas, while Republicans win more seats with fewer total votes. Communities driving population growth end up with less political representation than before. That's not democracy reflecting voters. That's voters being managed. Even with these maps, cracks are showing. In a 2025 special election in Texas Senate District 9, a district Trump reportedly won by more than 17 points, the Democratic candidate nearly won outright. Statewide polling shows Trump's approval in Texas hovering around even, not dominant. These aren't proof of a blue wave, but they are evidence that small shifts in turnout and coalition strength can matter enormously, and that gerrymandering is doing heavy lifting to preserve Republican control. Texas isn't an outlier, it's a prototype. Other Republican-controlled states have adopted similar strategies. Aggressive redistricting, race-neutral language masking racial effects, litigation delays replacing preclearance. This is how minority rule becomes durable without overtly banning votes. Quiet, technical, legal, and dangerously effective. Texas didn't turn red because voters demanded it. It looks red because the rules were rewritten to make it so. Understanding that matters, especially as candidates like Jasmine Crockett challenge the narrative that Texas is politically frozen. This isn't about one election. It's about whether democracy responds to people or whether power redraws the map to protect itself. And once you see how it works in Texas, you start to recognize it everywhere. Thanks for spending a few minutes digging into this with me. If you want more grounded, progressive commentary without the outrage bait, subscribe and stick around. Every time you watch, share, and engage, it helps build a community that believes democracy is worth understanding and defending. I'll see you in the next video.